So what I'd like to do is introduce our speaker for tonight, Charles Brown, who's also our treasurer. So come on up, Charles.
Thank you. All right. So the genesis of this talk was actually a paper that I had agreed to write for Deanna about a year ago. And as I was working on the paper, I started, doing artwork and I put it in on PowerPoint. And then the PowerPoint became complete, but meanwhile the paper never, got finished. That kind of tells you, my desire to write. I think is probably somewhere pretty low on my list of preferences. But that being said, I'm glad that I did learn a lot in researching this this whole project, and I am glad to be able to share some of this information with you. There are so many of you that are so experienced in this group, and sometimes between my wine and sharing some of the knowledge I've learned, I don't know. I feel like sometimes maybe I should just sit down, but here it goes. So. So we're going to talk about sulfur dioxide. So the things we're going to talk about. So the nomenclature. The reason we're going to discuss the nomenclature a little bit is because it's frankly it's actually a bit confusing, especially for somebody who's looking at chemistry. And the reason is because number one is that we use the word sulfite and sulfur dioxide interchangeably. But they're actually different molecules that actually have distinct functions. And I think part of the reason that we use them interchangeably is because the source of the sulfites and the SO2 in winemaking is potassium metabisulfite. That's the source. So I think that because of that single source supplying both, I think that's probably one of the reasons that both terms both chemicals that use interchangeably. Is that anything? Oh, okay. We'll talk about the different functions of SO2 and sulfites, the distribution in wine, and then we'll talk about some yeast metabolism. We'll also do some an example calculation in terms of looking at when we need to add sulfites to our wine. Okay, so first of all, the nomenclature. So sulfur dioxide is a gas molecule, SO2. And there are the sulfates, which is SO4. There are sulfites, which is S2, and that's a metabolite from yeast metabolism, and we don't want that in our wine. That is what gives you, that forms hydrogen sulfide, and is what gives you the rotten egg smell. Then there are the sulfites. The sulfites, we have the metabisulfite, which is K2O5 negative 2. So these are all dissolved ions. Then there's the bisulfite, and then there is the sulfite itself. The bisulfite is really the workhorse in terms of the antioxidant activity of this molecule in preserving the wine. And then we look at these right here. So we look at these other terms where we measure the sulfite that is actually in wine. There we talk about the free SO2, and that's actually this group right here. And the free SO2 is actually made up of the sulfites in solution plus the molecular SO2. The molecular SO2 is the gaseous form of SO2. And that is what's protecting the wine. The free SO2 is what protects the wine. Then there are SO2 that are bound to various chemicals within the wine, and these being like aldehydes, proteins, these being sugars, and so forth. and they're bound, and some of them are permanently bound, like with aldehydes, or some of them are temporarily bound in equilibrium, like with some of the sugar molecules. And but these that are bound, even if they're in equilibrium, at the time that you do a measurement and you get the free CO2, I'm sorry, the free SO2, that free SO2 is what's telling you what is available to protect the wine. The ones that are bound, they're not going to be able to help you at all in terms of preserving the wine. So, and that, and then we look at that a little bit more closely. So you look at SO2, and there will be chemistry here. And for those of you that like chemistry, it's great. And but for those of you that don't like chemistry, there are take-home points. Hopefully, I'll be able to be clear about that for everyone. So when you look at again the total SO2, the free SO2 is what protects the wine. The bound SO2 does not protect the wine. And the bound SO2 has both SO2 that are stably bound and those that are unstably bound or in equilibrium that's coming on and off. And before we talk about that a little bit more, and we'll look at the how it's binding. The SO2 basically is working with these functional groups called aldehyde functional groups. And so that's what this is. And in doing so, the SO2 binds to it. We have sugars where the same aldehyde group is what the SO2 is using to bind. And then we have acetaldehyde, which is something we don't want in our wine. And that binding with acetaldehyde is permanent. And the reason that the binding with these sugar acids are not permanent is because the sugar acids in the wine can actually form rings. And in the process of forming a ring, and it comes up and becomes a chain, and it forms a ring. And in the process of forming the ring, the SO2 is kicked off. So it's in equilibrium with the sugar acid molecules. But with acetaldehyde, it's not. It's a permanent binding, and that's a good thing because acetaldehyde is a product of oxidation in wine, and we don't want that unless you're trying to make a sherry. We don't really want that in our wine, and the SO2 binds it permanently. So if you drink a wine and early on in the process of winemaking, you start getting that hint of acetaldehyde, and once you smell it, it burns into your mind what it is, and it has some SO2. The SO2 were inactivated, and it's a good way to save the wine from acetaldehyde. And acetaldehyde can also come from yeast metabolism as well, and as yeast metabolize glucose, a certain percentage of acetaldehyde is generated. So having that SO2 to neutralize it, so it becomes an inactive compound that is tasteless and smellless, that's a good thing. All right. So far, so good? Okay. Now, so we talked about that, and then we kind of want to break it down a little bit between sulfur dioxide and sulfites. And one of the things that I learned is that when you dissolve potassium metabisulfite, and that's what this is, K2S2O5, when you dissolve that in water, and it's not necessary to look at all this other stuff, but what I'm trying to point out is that you get sulfites, and then you get sulfur dioxide. And both of these molecules come from potassium metabisulfite. And these two molecules independently protect the wine with different functions. So the bisulfite, which is this one right here, will interact with oxygen, neutralizing oxygen. So any dissolved oxygen in the wine, the bisulfite is your scavenger. That's your scavenger that goes through the wine and removes it. And and that's your workhorse. The bisulfite is doing 90% of your antioxidative protection. So it is an antioxidant. Um, and you can see also right here, I do want to make a point here. If you look at this, you see that for every 2 molecules of bisulfite, you neutralize 1 molecule of oxygen. And bisulfite has twice the molecular weight as oxygen. So what that tells you is that for every gram of dissolved oxygen in your wine, it takes 4 grams of SO2 to neutralize it. So that's something that you can very quickly calculate. You know, when you do a dissolved SO2, if you have a machine and that's something that you look at, especially with bottling, and that's something that you look at, then you want to be able to make sure that you have enough additional sulfite to account for that, that will help you neutralize the oxygen in the wine. And then sulfur dioxide itself, this is the workhorse for the antimicrobial activity. It does, and it does this through the fact that sulfur dioxide is a very reactive molecule. It interacts with many different proteins indiscriminately, and cells need protein because proteins are enzymes, and cells need functional enzymes in order to live. And that's why SO2 kills. And is by inactivating a lot of, by interacting with proteins indiscriminately, it basically defunctionalize or inactivate the enzymes, and thus results in cell death. This is, again, the workhorse of the antimicrobial activity, and we will talk a lot more about this, later on when we start looking at, what we strive for in wine to get that protection. We, look at, there's a number that 0.8 ppm molecular SO2. That's one number that a lot of people hang their hat on, and we'll go more into that and how that protects the wine. SO2 does have some antioxidative properties, and one is it inactivates enzymes that causes oxidation of the wine. And so these are like polyphenol oxidase, and polyphenols, of which tannins, the anthocyanins, all those, and that the anthocyanins are the colors of the wine. The tannins is what, part of the structure of the wine. These are all polyphenols, and polyphenol oxidase will oxidize them, especially when the tannins are early on, because as wine ages, a lot of the tannins will actually polymerize. Then they're less susceptible to oxidation. But early on, when they're single units, they're very susceptible to oxidation. And then lastly, we mentioned this, but this is an important point. Sulfur dioxide will permanently inactivate any acetaldehyde molecule in your wine, given that you have enough sulfur dioxide. And acetaldehyde is the product of two things: yeast metabolism of glucose through an oxidative process, or oxidation of alcohol, of ethanol in your wine, that would give rise to acetaldehyde. So those are the results of oxidation, and what sulfur dioxide can come in after the fact and neutralize that oxidative effect.
Doesn't acetaldehyde cause smokers or discomfort?
I don't know about that. I think there's a lot of alcohol in it that can do that too. I honestly don't know. Yeah, I know it certainly doesn't lend wine, the taste that, what, we typically look for. And it creates an off taste that we typically, don't want in our wine.
I think it's almost like a poison.
Yeah, I think acetaldehyde, a lot of these organic molecules certainly, especially the aldehydes, in low quantities, they're okay, but in higher quantities, they definitely, are a lot more symptomatic, let's say, than ethanol is. All right, and so this is another picture that looks at what happens when you dissolve potassium metabisulfite in the wine. And there are 3 species that are generated. And again, these are sulfur dioxide, bisulfite, and sulfite. But the reality is sulfite really doesn't really play a role because when we make wine, the pH of our wine really is in this area, right here, okay, between 3 and 4. And that's where most of our wine pH fall. And at that range, really the 2 species are important are the bisulfites and the sulfur dioxide. And they're in equilibrium. And then if you look at this curve here, as we go towards more acidic conditions, you generate more SO2. As we go towards more basic conditions, that equilibrium shifts and we generate more bisulfites. And so bisulfites, again, is an antioxidant, and sulfur dioxide, that's your antimicrobial protection. So that's something to keep in mind because for any given concentration of potassium metabisulfite that you put into your wine, depending on the pH, it can be either sulfur dioxide and acidic pH, gives you antimicrobial protection, or bisulfite, towards bisulfite and away from SO2, thereby giving you more antioxidative protection and removing that antimicrobial activity. So that is something that to keep in mind, and that's certainly something that we will talk about. And a lot of times when we talk about adding, sulfur dioxide or potassium metabisulfite to wine, a lot of times what we are looking at simultaneously is the pH of the wine, and that tells you where things are in terms of sulfites and sulfur dioxide. Okay, and in this graph here, this is a chart. And so these 2 graphs are generated from this chart. And I think most of us that make wine, we probably have this chart hanging around somewhere, stuck on the wall in our cellar, in our wine lab, or whatever. And we all have that. And basically what this is looking at is the percentage of, is based on pH to achieve a particular percentage of SO2. So, for example, if you want to have 0.8 molecular SO2, you need a certain free SO2. And free SO2 is what you can measure. And remember, going back to the diagram, the free SO2 is made up of molecular SO2, which is the SO2 gas, plus the bisulfite. That combination is free SO2. And so, that free SO2 is what you can measure, and that free SO2 is what you try to add to bring up your SO2 to the level that will give you the protection that you need. Okay, and based on this table right here, we will have a calculation example where we'll do some calculations, and that will become very evident what these numbers mean. But looking at this is that if you look at pH in parts per million for molecular SO2, it's very clear that as the pH increases, the molecular SO2 in your wine for any amount of potassium metabisulfite that you added into your wine decreases and it decreases in the logarithmic function. So a little change in pH can actually mean a lot in the drop for your molecular SO2. So that's something to keep in mind. And the amount of free SO2 that you need to add to achieve the 0.8 ppm of molecular SO2 that you want, again, with pH variation, it goes up logarithmically as the pH increases. Perhaps anytime. Yeah. No, that's a good question. And honestly, I struggle with that myself. Okay. So people say, well, that red wine has a lot of polyphenols in it, a lot of anthocyanin, which is antioxidative by themselves. And so they themselves, the anthocyanins, and even some of the tannins can protect the wine. And therefore, for red wine, you can actually get away with 0.5. And then for white wine, you need a little higher, sulfur dioxide, or I'm sorry, a little higher bisulfides for that, because it lacks that inherent or the intrinsic, antioxidants that the wine has. But but if you think about that, I don't know if I agree with that, because the whole point of these charts between 0.8 and 0.5, the 0.8 ppm of molecular SO2 and the 0.5 ppm of molecular SO2, you're generating SO2 gas, which is your antimicrobial protection. Okay? So really the issue is not antioxidation. The issue is antimicrobial protection. So I don't know necessarily that white wine versus red wine needs less, that red wine needs less antimicrobial protection than white wine. I personally use 0.8. I think it's at a level, I think a lot of people use it, it's at a level I cannot detect. Because sometimes people put too much, SO2 or into their wine, and boy, you open that bottle and you gotta decant it and let it sit for an hour before that matchstick smell goes away. So that's something But yeah, at 0.8, I think you're pretty safe, and I use 0.8 for that reason. It's not so much, again, not so much for the antioxidative property, but really for the antimicrobial activity. Okay, I do need to talk about yeast metabolism a little bit, because there are some good pearls that I learned, when I did this project, and so one of them is sulfites. Sulfites will be metabolized by yeast cells. It enters into the yeast cell, and it can be used for metabolism, or as a electron acceptor, and it helps to generate energy for the cell. The sulfites can be converted into sulfides that then are used in synthesis of sulfur amino acids, and there are two of them, cysteine and methionine. And both of these amino acids are essential amino acids. And but in the process of metabolizing sulfites, in order for the yeast cell to make these two essential amino acids, some sulfites are generated, and that's the S negative, S minus 2. And that can then lead to hydrogen sulfide production, which is rotten eggs. We look at the genetics of our yeast when we buy commercial yeast. And one of the things we look for is low hydrogen sulfide production. So that's where this comes in. And that is directly related to the sulfites that we add. Now, that being said, this part right here, the methionine and the cysteine metabolism can actually be shut down. If you give the yeast cells cysteine and methionine, uh, then it will inhibit those pathways. So the sulfites are not metabolized into sulfites, and that's where fermate O is. So fermate O has cysteine and methionine already in it. So the yeast cells, they don't need to do this, and therefore it's another step to decrease the sulfide production. So I'm an advocate of that. Fermate. The other thing is we also look at is through regular sugar metabolism in the yeast cell, acetaldehyde is generated. So you can prevent that, and it's nice to have that sulfite around to basically permanently inactivate that, the acetaldehyde. So those are the 2 points that I took away from this. So when do we add sulfites to our wine? So this is my practice, and certainly anybody can chime in and talk about that. So I added a pre-fermentation. Okay, this is fermentation, and then we sort of, and this is the anchor to this timeline. So pre-fermentation, and typically what I do is I add a quarter teaspoon of potassium metabisulfite for every 5 gallons of must, and this roughly it gives you roughly around 50 ppm of sulfur dioxide into the wine, but it's just a little bit under, but it's close enough in terms of just calculations. But the reality is that a lot of that initial dose of sulfites that you add, 50 to 60% of that is going to be bound up and be unavailable to protect the wine, which is actually, early on is probably not a bad thing, because you need to go through fermentation, you need to go through MLF for your wine, and so and so that's why people talk about when you are doing fermentation in MLF, the wine is quote unquote unprotected. I've done, right after fermentation, and my free SO2 is like 10 ppm. I even had numbers like 8 ppm. It's really low, and that's because most of it is actually bound up, and so the wine is not too protected really when it's undergoing fermentation. The only thing that you're really, what's going for that wine is the vigor of the commercial yeast that's preventing other organisms from having the space to be able to, grow and take over and have some, abnormal metabolism. The other thing that I have also started doing is co-inoculation and doing my MLF at the same time as my primary fermentation. And because what that does is it shortens the amount of time that your wine is truly unprotected. Because you really are not going to add any more sulfite until after fermentation and MLF is finished. That's what I and so that being said, it is and I just lost my thought. But anyway, so that's yeah. So that's what it is. Let's see what else that I want to say here. And then after the first racking, yeah. So go ahead. Yes, sir.
So you add that potassium sulfite, then how long do you wait before you add your yeast fermentation?
I usually wait between 12 to 24 hours, not longer than 24. I'll add it and then I'll let it sit overnight, and then the first thing in the morning I pitch my yeast. I don't test it. Yeah, I do not test it. Yeah. So, yep. Yes. Anybody let it go longer sometimes? Oh, okay. And you also measure uh, pH, uh, TA, thank you. Yeah. Mike.
You just mentioned that each time you access the line,
Well, each time I access it, I measure it.
I'm just saying that when you're monitoring MLS, maybe you're trying to get in there, monitor MLS. I don't want to be adding this.
Yeah. I tell you, MLF is tricky. Yeah. Sometimes it's done quickly. Sometimes it goes on for a month, and so I typically don't. I just let it sit until I don't see little bubbles coming up, and you'll see MLF. You'll see if it's still active. You'll see little bubbles, and as long as that's still going on, I don't bother to measure. And and the SC300, the Bimetrica SC300 does have an attachment that you can use to measure malic acid. Um, it's a little bit cumbersome. It does. There is a learning curve in terms of how to use it, so you can be, sparing with your reagents. But that gives you a true zero value versus paper chromatography, which does not give you is a paper chromatography is a qualitative measurement. It's not a quantitative measurement. Um, okay, and then during the aging process, I will taste. The other thing that I do is along this time frame, whenever I access the wine, I will taste it, and I think that is as important. That sensory evaluation is important, and I'll taste it every time I access it, in addition to the test that I run. And then as it goes through aging, every 6 weeks, I will taste the wine, and then I will measure the pH. I will measure the free SO2, and I will determine how much needs to be added to keep my wine protected. Okay, so this is a calculation problem. So you have 5 gallons of Petit Pearl wine. You tested the wine and found that the pH is 3.6. The free SO2 and the free SO2 of that wine is 20 ppm. How much should you add to achieve a 0.8 ppm molecular SO2? Okay, so that's and before we do the calculation, there's some constants. So, and these are useful numbers to have in your back pocket. For me, I find them very useful. So 1 ppm is the same as 1 milligram per liter. And also 57.6% of potassium metabisulfite is SO2. Okay? So when you calculate the amount of potassium metabisulfite you're adding, remember that whatever you add, 57.6% of that is SO2. And SO2 is what you want to increase, okay, for the molecular SO2, the 0.8 molecular SO2. And then 1 gallon is 3.78. So, and then if we use this table again, and we look at this table, and you say, okay, at pH of 3.6, to get 0.8 molecular SO2 to have the adequate antimicrobial protection of the wine, you need 50 ppm of free SO2. Okay? And that's what you need, 50 ppm of free SO2. And your measurement of the wine was 20, so you have a deficit of 30, basically. And the other thing to also look at this right here, and this also becomes clear to me at least, why why I'm not as concerned about the antioxidative protection or the oxidative protection of the wine from the sulfites. The reason is because really at any given, look at, at any given pH, at any given level, you have enough, really enough sulfites to provide oxidative protection of the wine. It's that small fraction, okay, that is, you're looking at, if you look at this column, at these wine pH range, and so these are the range where wine pH fall into, only 1 to 3% or 4% of your sulfites are in the form of molecular SO2 or the SO2 gas, which is what's giving you microbial protection. And so, for that reason, I'm not really, because there's plenty of bisulfites left to protect the wine from oxidation. It's the antimicrobial effect that is so small in number that it's easy for that to basically run out, and then you have no antimicrobial protection. Okay, let's get back to this calculation here. So the desired ppm of free SO2 is 50. The current SO2 is 20. So you need to add equivalent of 30 ppm of free SO2. And so this is the calculation that I use. So you start out with 30 milligrams. So you need 30 ppm of SO2, which is the same as 30 milligrams per liter of SO2. So 30 milligrams SO2 per liter. That's what you want to achieve. And the question is how many grams of potassium metabisulfite you want to add. So this is a cancellation of units. So you just multiply, so 3.785 liters is 1 gallon. This is a ratio of 1. They're equivalent. You can multiply with anything that are equivalent, and then just line up your units so the units cancel out. So the liter cancels out. And then 1 gram of SO2 is 1,000 milligrams of SO2. Again, that's equivalent. So the milligram SO2 cancels out. The grams SO2 cancels out with this. 1 gram of potassium metabisulfite is 0.576 grams of SO2. So that cancels out. That leaves you with grams of KMBS per gallon. And then you have 5 gallons. The gallons cancel out. So you end up with 0.99 grams of KMBS. So, it's a little cumbersome. You can think through some of these problems, but if you actually line up these factors to make sure that they cancel out, and as long as you are multiplying by a ratio that are equivalent ratios of 1, okay? Just like, 3.785 liters is 1 gallon. That's equivalent. They're the same. 1 gram of sulfite of sulfur dioxide is the same as 1,000 milligrams of sulfur dioxide. The same. As long as you multiply by these, it'll work out. But again, you can think through it, and there are calculators. On the internet, there are calculators you can plug it in, and it spits out, the answer that you need. So you can do that. So 0.99 grams of potassium metabisulfite is what you need to add to this 5 gallons of wine. However, there's another consideration that whatever you add, 50 to 60% of that is going to bind. We think, we don't really know exactly what that number is because every wine has its own molecular makeup. So therefore, the amount of potassium metabisulfite, the amount of sulfites and SO2 that are bound can be different from wine to wine. Okay? But as a general rule, there are general rules. As a general rule, it's okay to add an additional 30 to 50% of what you estimated, to be. So, so roughly 0.99, and so I typically, be on the conservative side, so I add an additional 30%. So I just multiply that number by 1.3. So in this case, I'm going to add 1.29 grams of potassium metabisulfite. So And that's what I do. And again, that's because there is this bound portion where these molecules are not available to protect your wine. Okay. All right. So okay. I think that's it. I didn't say there will be no math. All right.
I have any other questions?
I know that when I work with one person, I will frustrate you with like how much now so I sample like what this and part of the reason is that open active grow, what is now. And yeah, so things like that totally make a lot of sense, right? If you add a certain amount, let's say you add 1.3 of the 30% extra that you calculated, and then you measure it, and it turns out that you overshot it by 30%. Well, that's not really telling you you're not, you don't need you don't need this. There's hardly any additional binding, in that one, and so you don't need to add that extra.
Right, right. Okay.
Yeah.
That's saying because I typically use I think it's a winemaker magazine sulfur calculator. Look and use that, and that's where I always kind of come to and it's like, okay, well, how much is 20 pounds sulfite is there?
Yeah. No, one of the keys early on that put me into peach oil, and that it has a lot of protein, is that I would add, and I would add 30% more, and it's like I barely touched it. It's like a lot of what I added was found, and so when I started scratching my head, well, what's going on here? I know that great easy, it's got a lot of anthocyanin in it, and sulfur dioxide can provide anthocyanin, and in fact we've probably all done it, right? You spill some wine on the floor, you spray some 10% potassium metabisulfite on the floor, and it bleaches it out, takes the stain right out, and so we've done that too. So it does bind anthocyanins. But it actually clued me in. Well, this is a protein, because it is a hybrid grape. Hybrid grapes they have a lot higher protein than the vinifera grapes. And so yeah, working with that grape kind of clued me in. Maybe this grape has a really high protein. And when I finally sent my sample out for a man test, it was like 500 milligrams. It was crazy high. For people. So things like that, working with things like that and testing often will actually help you understand, a particular variety. And also for that bad to one you're with.
Yeah, so trying to understand all of this math here. But technically, using a 5-gallon batch of wine
Yeah.
and a quarter teaspoon of potassium metabisulfite equaling 50 parts per million, over the life of making that wine and racking it, you could put in that quarter teaspoon 5 or 6 times.
That would be absolutely, but that would be very empirical. You can undershoot it or you can overshoot.
Right, yeah, for the testing for what's free and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And
You put years and years ago, it was no more than 200. I forget what the class was the norm. And so, okay, I'm just making sure that I can add on those other quarter teaspoons.
yeah, but I have an inkling that that quarter teaspoon that we add to 5 gallons of must,
Yeah.
we are way undershooting it.
Sure.
Yeah, and but I think it's okay.
I'm understanding that too, because I put in that quarter teaspoon and sometimes come back a week later. Where did it go?
Yeah, yeah. I think early on, I think we're way under because a lot of it is found up right away.
Sure.
But I think early on that's okay. It gives you a little bit of protection,
Yeah.
mainly from all the junk that you bring in from the vineyard, and then it also allows your yeast and your lactic acid bacteria to do their job.
Okay.
Yeah. I do. Yeah. Well, I think that the white wine, it's really not must. I think you can add it, and you can certainly. I think there's room in white wine to get better. If you want a tighter protection, I think you can do that in the sense that you're only going to add yeast to it, and most yeast are very tolerant. Commercial yeast are very tolerant of that. Yeah. True, but you'll be surprised that the commercial lactic acid bacteria, and there are, let me backtrack a little bit. There are enzymes, that will metabolize sulfites. It's inherent in yeast, and yeast has been identified. And some of the commercial clones of MLF bacteria actually have some of these enzymes that are selected for. So they're actually more the commercial lactic acid bacteria, the MLF, especially the Pneumococcus, they're actually more resistant than you think. We're not talking about sensitivity in the 20, 30 ppm. You're still looking at 50, 60 ppm for the Pneumococcus. They're actually more resistant. ppm. Yeah. So if you look at Scott Labs, and you look at the Enococcus, your commercial Enococcus MLF bacterium, lactic acid bacteria, they'll tell you what your SO2 limit is, and it's 50 and 60 ppm. What's that? That's free. Yeah, that's free. Because the total is inactivated. Right. Yeah. And I think that for me, like I say, in white wine, if you're not, I think in white wine, I do the same thing. I put a quarter teaspoon, but certainly if you want to kind of go and see, you can certainly measure it right away the next day and see where you are, and then try to get it up a little higher because that first batch of KMBS that you add is bound up, and by the next day, a lot of it is already gone.
And look at the on. You go through and fermentation done, and you back, and must be released. That way, it has sulfites.
The hydrogen sulfide smell, unlike like the volatile acid, which is where the acetic acid bacteria, that's where they come in and give you that vinegar smell, and that kind of stuff. That's what the molecular SOPs is detecting are those bacteria. There are other lactic acid bacteria that are not pneumococcal cellulose. The hydrogen sulfide generation happens in two instances, and one is, you have too much sulfides, and then it gets shunted through yeast metabolism to generate sulfides. Okay, so that's one downside of having too much sulfides. The other one is metabolism, anaerobic metabolism. Okay, so you have some barely surviving yeast, and they're degrading, but then you have the gross leaves that settle, and you let that gross leaf degrade and rot, and in the absence of oxygen, you will generate hydrogen sulfide. Yeah, and so you gotta, so the gross leaves, that, after you press the gross leaves, you gotta get that off, like in 3 days or so, 3 to 5 days. You don't want that to stick around too long.
You don't want to sit around for 2 to 3 weeks.
No. Then you would generate an anaerobic environment, and then chemically you will induce hydrogen sulfide.
Because I just got done writing the white wine, gross leaves, is after pressing it, I will crush it to steps, my whites, and I will ferment them on the skins for about 3 days, and that brings up the grapes. But I guess a really good juice extraction. There's a difference between the two. Don't do that. I make it 2 gallons of juice. If I do that for like 3 days, I'll get 5 gallons of juice. It's that big of a difference. And all the gross leaves, yeah, goes in there. But I never knew all the heavy solids to rack off. Soon, because you have the fermentation that's going on, that's going all the way around.
Well, right after pressing, so in your case, your skin contact time to the white grapes, you said what day? 3 days.
No more than 3.
Okay, so it's not a whole lot, but so you press that, but a lot of that actually is still working material. You're not done with your primary fermentation. So yeah, I don't that I will leave in, and but that's where if you think you have a lot of solid material, okay, that can potentially settle down, then you should stir that wine as it's fermenting, just to get it up. But a lot of times too, when you have a very vigorous fermentation, these things will actually, like, it has like a semi-boiling effect, and they will move around. Because when they start to settle, and you think the primary fermentation is over, and you want to go ahead and rack, you rack that, then you get that gross leaf settle, and that's your dead yeast, and that's where you want to, get that off as quickly as possible.
We talked both about, by the way, this is excellent presentation. I like the math. But we talked about a quarter teaspoon per 5 gallons of methyl. You also mentioned about 10% solution. What do you use?
Well, you can use 10% solution. I think it's it's fine. I prefer the solid just because it's easy. I do have 10% solution in a spray bottle. I use that more convenient than anything else. But you can certainly, between solid versus 10% solution, it does break down quicker than a 10% solution. So what you are adding that you think is what you need to add, 3 days from making that solution, is probably different than the solid, which, it doesn't break down
whatever percent solution.
Yeah.
There will be a breakdown of the capacity of the reactor salted.
Yeah, so what's happening, and we probably all smell it, right? I mean, the sulfur dioxide, and it's, very, irritating to the lungs, and you cough, and all that. And that, breaks down it's faster in the solution. So you're losing that SO2. And everything is, is in equilibrium. And if you're losing that SO2, the reaction tries to make up that deficit. And so it actually quickens the process. In a solid, the breakdown is not as quick. Yeah. And the reason also is that when you dissolve it in water, if you ever test your 10% solution, it's an acidic solution. So versus solid, so that acidic solution is going to come to breakdown to generate sulfur dioxide. And so I don't unless I'm making the solution up that day, then I trust it. But otherwise, I use it. And then my potassium and my sulfite, I replace them every 6 months. Yeah, because we all smell it. Even the solid KMBS, you can get that whiff of that SO2. Oh, it does. In the beginning, yep. Yeah. And I've noticed that too in my 10%. And my 10% that I use, which is high, and a lot of it actually I use it in my oil. So, yeah. All right.
Hey, everybody. Hope you had fun. We've got a swap meet in the back. Bring your cash. Buy some carboys. Thank you.